Welcome everyone, happy Friday. Welcome to Masterclass Friday here on Adobe Live. So for those of you who are just joining for the first time, my name is Terry White, Worldwide Photography Evangelist here at Adobe, and it's my pleasure to be taking you through today's Masterclass. It's also kind of a high note and a sad note at the same time because this is the last Masterclass Friday of the year, or like I like to refer to it, of Season 1, 2020. So season one, or this year, we kicked off this whole masterclass series on Fridays with all the evangelists. And today's our last Friday of work before the end of the year. So this is actually the last masterclass of the year. And again, they'll be throughout the day. So I'm up first, then I think Paul's after me doing Photoshop, and then Jason's going to be doing video and audio. And then Kyle or Howard does Adobe XD and UI UX design. And then Kyle does drawing. So we have master classes all day. And this is Masterclass Friday, but this is the last one of 2020. So with that said, today we're going to be taking a look at a topic that falls right into photography, and that is shooting RAW or JPEG or RAW plus JPEG, and which one should you use and why. And also we're going to take a look at how to set up RAW, Apple's Pro RAW on an iPhone 12 Pro or 12 Pro Max. Those are the only two devices that shoot in Apple's Pro RAW at this time. So lots of things to cover today. I'm going to get into a lot more. I kind of went live earlier this week, kind of just showing the Pro RAW stuff, but we're going to get a lot more details today because we got more time. I got like 52 minutes left. So we're going to dive deep and get right into it. And again, if you're watching this on another platform, I see a bunch of people over on my YouTube channel. I see a bunch of people on Creative Cloud YouTube. I see people on Facebook. I see all these people here, and that's great. But if you want me to see your comments, because I can't look at all the chat windows and still do the stream at the same time. So if you want to see, if you want me to see your comment or question, head over to b.net/Adobe Live. So if you're fine just hanging out, you can hang out wherever you're watching this, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever it is. But unfortunately, I can't look at all those chats at the same time and still present. So I'm gonna pay attention to the main chat where I see people like Victoria, Gerald, Steve, James, Stefan or Steven, Tim, Andres, Richard, and Sean, and Jason. Welcome everyone, and thanks for being here. All right, so with that said, Paul Lee, thanks for the great classes. You're welcome, Paul. I'm glad you're able to get something out of them. So once again, if you want me to see your question, I'm going to be looking at this chat right here, high over there, and high over there, and high right there, but this is the chat I'm going to be looking at. Head over to Adobe Live, which is b.net/Adobe Live. And you can sign in with your Adobe ID if you want to post to the chat. All right, so with that said, let me go ahead and turn that off, and let's go ahead and dive over to my desktop so you can see what I've got set up here and see what we're going to be talking about. All right, so to get ready for this class, I did a couple of things. I went out and took some pictures just pointing up at the sky with my Nikon Z6 II Mark II, Roman numeral 2, the newest camera. And I purposely did something. I turned it on to a setting I never ever use, and that's RAW plus JPEG. That means that every time you press the shutter, you're going to get two images saved to the card instead of one. You're going to get a RAW and a JPEG of the exact same image. Now, I can't think of too many reasons why you would want to shoot that way, but I'll give you a couple of my experiences in shooting RAW plus JPEG. The very first time I did it on purpose. I'm shooting an event. I think it was a family reunion or something. I'm shooting an event, and I want to be able to quickly give people JPEGs. So if I just shoot RAW plus JPEGs, then I already have the JPEGs, and I just give them to them. I don't mean hand it to them on a card. I mean like email it or whatever. And that creates, of course, twice as many files. And I remember hating the fact that I did that, because it would be different if I were going to hand them the JPEGs right out of the camera and not do anything to them. That'd be one thing. but they still needed things done to them. They still needed some processing, exposure adjustments. They still needed adjusting. And so what I caught myself doing was adjusting JPEGs just to give them JPEGs instead of, and then having to go back and adjust the RAWs. And I'm like, well, why don't I just adjust the RAW and export JPEGs? So then why did I shoot RAW plus JPEG in the first place? So that was a mistake. Like I never did it for that reason again. Now, the only other time I did it on purpose was when I was, before we really had a good way of bringing images into your mobile devices. Like now we have Lightroom and we have the ability to bring in cards right into an iPhone or iPad. But before we had a good way of doing that, what I would do is I would shoot RAW plus JPEG because I'd be on my DSLR at the time and using Nikon's or Nikon's SnapBridge app on my phone or iPad, I could transfer those JPEGs over and share them on social media. So it was just a quick way to give me, and Dan saying the same thing. So you can have immediately share for social media on a client shoot. And that was kind of my reason for doing it. And that was okay. The images sometimes still needed adjusting, but that was the quickest way of getting those JPEGs over to my phone because they would just transfer automatically as I was shooting. And that was back before SnapBridge could even transfer RAW files, which now it can. And even now that it can, the RAW files take forever to transfer because they're so big. So that was my only other reason for doing it. So unless you've got a specific workflow that requires you to have both files, I would say pick one. Pick JPEG or pick RAW. But I can't think of too many reasons today in 2020, hopefully and soon in 2021, get this year over with, that you really need to shoot RAW plus JPEG unless you just, again, that you have a specific workflow. If you got a specific workflow, I'm not telling you don't do your specific workflow. But if you're new to this and you're thinking, should I turn this feature on, and you don't have a reason to do it, then don't do it. In other words, only do it if you have a reason to do it. Like Stefan's saying, he's got a reason to provide previews before editing, basically to decide what to edit. And then we're going to talk about that too. That's another good reason. But like I said, if you're new and you're saying, I don't know why I would need to do that, then don't. Pick one or the other, but don't shoot both. Now, I shot both for a demo purpose for this reason, but I'm going to recommend that you pick one. Now, let's talk about why would you pick one or the other. I shoot RAW probably 99.9% of the time. Like, very rarely am I ever turning my regular camera onto JPEG. Like, I can't think of the last time I did that. But I shoot portraits, and I shoot travel, and I shoot a lot of things that don't require buffering a bunch of images at the same time. And what I mean by that is if you're shooting sports, you're shooting fast-moving cars, you're shooting a lot of things that are happening quickly, where you need to shoot a bunch of images at the same time, then JPEG might be your solution, because since the files are smaller, you can shoot a bunch more than you could if you were buffering those same amount of images in RAW. So your buffer is going to fill up much faster with a bigger file, and you're not going to be able to shoot as many, and you may miss that critical shot because of the time it took to buffer, 16 images in a row versus 30 images in a row if they were JPEGs. I'm just throwing out numbers. So sports shooters probably still shoot JPEG a lot. I'm not saying primarily, but a lot for that reason. They need to shoot 100 images quickly while the action's happening. And therefore, JPEG's going to let them shoot the most amount of images in the shortest amount of time based on the hardware. Now, hardware and cameras have come a long way. And that may not be as big of an argument as it was years ago, because the cameras are faster, the memory cards are faster, the buffers are bigger, they can shoot more images, and they still may prefer shooting RAW even for sports. But I'm going to just say that that's the reason why. And like Sean's saying, I can shoot 200 RAW frames before the camera buffers. So again, technology has also stepped up too, to where that may not be a big deal anymore. So it just depends on your hardware and your workflow. Now, how do I like the new Nikon? I love it because of one reason. I have the Z6 before it, and now I have the Z6 II, or Mark II, or Roman numeral 2. I don't know how they pronounce it. The main reason I like it is because, not because it has 2 card slots. That wasn't a big deal for me. But it does have 2 card slots, and one of those card slots is now back to being an SD card, whereas the previous Z6 and Z7 only had 1 card slot, which again, I don't care about that. I didn't need to. But the 1 card slot was XQD. And XQD cards are super expensive. And you got to find, you have to have a reader for it and all that. Whereas SD cards are super cheap, and I have readers all over the place, even built into some of my computers. So that's the main reason I prefer that camera over the previous model. All right, now let's get into some actual workflow. Let's get into some differences here. Now there are, let me pull up my note. There are 3 big differences over RAW over JPEG. White balance, raw profiles, and just adjusting exposure and basically making adjustments. Those are the biggest 3 differences. And of course, it's a bigger file, so you're getting more data. I've got, again, RAW plus JPEG, and I overexpose these first couple for a reason, these 2. So let's go look at these. Oh, hang on, didn't mean to put them in black and white. All right, get back to color. Okay, now this is the JPEG on the left and the RAW on the right. And as you can see, they were shot at the exact same time. They have the exact same file name, except the extension is different. So this was literally taking 1 shot, pointing at the same thing to get the RAW and the JPEG, because that's the way my camera was set. Now you see on the left-hand side, the sky looks better. It's bluer. It's blown, they're both blown out, but the sky on the left looks better. The reason the JPEG will always look better is because the minute you press the button, as it's written to the card, the camera has already started making decisions for you and started processing that image for you. So if you're the kind of person that always nails your exposure and you always nail the lighting and everything, and you get it perfect, JPEG may be okay for you because you're going to get a smaller file. The processing will have happened. You won't get as much control over it, but maybe you don't need as much control. Maybe your shots come out looking great all the time and JPEG works out. So this is not an anti-JPEG class. This is just explaining the differences. Now on the right-hand side, there's not as much color, and the image is they're both blown out, but it's kind of flatter. And that's on purpose because the one on the right is coming right off the camera sensor with virtually no processing applied to it. And that's the reason why people shoot in RAW, is because they want that image where the camera didn't make any decisions, so they can go make it look the way they want with whatever they're using to process the RAW files. So with that said, why did I shoot these overexposed? So I can show you an example of what you get. Because all the rest you can see are properly exposed. So why did I shoot these overexposed? Well, if we go to the JPEG and we go into the develop module, and I've got the highlight warning turned on. This is with it turned off. With it turned off, you see the regular image. With it turned on, you see everything in red. That red overlay is everything that's blown out. In other words, it's clipped. The highlights are clipped. That means that everywhere there's red, there's no data right now. There's no pixels, I should say. I shouldn't say no data. There's no pixels. It's completely white. There's no pixels. There's no sky. There's no cloud detail. There's no nothing. Now, if we go to the very next shot, which is the raw image, and we look at that same image, here, I'm going to hit reset to make sure it's not processed, reset. There's very little of that clipping. So right off the bat, shooting in RAW kept more detail. Just right off the bat without me doing anything. I got more sky, more actual clouds, more not just white pixels than I did with the JPEG shot at the exact same time, exact same settings, exact same way. So with that said, what if I now needed to correct it? What if I now needed to say, hey, I can't live with it being blown out like that. Let me fix it. Well, if I go up to the histogram and I now pull back on the whites, which will reduce that, clipping. I'm pulling on the left and I go all the way to the left as far as I can. That's all I can recover on this JPEG. That's it. I can try bringing other things back. I can try bringing the highlights down and try and bring it back. But I don't know what I just did there. There you go. I can try bringing the highlights down and get some of it back. But that's now changing the highlights. That's not just bringing down the clipping. If I were to go to the raw file and pull back that exact same slider, I can get back to almost doing no clipping with that same image in raw. So now I got nice puffy clouds that aren't completely clipped or blown out, except for in these little spots here, versus the JPEG pulling the whites back as far as I can. That's as far as I can pull the whites back, and look at how much more clipping I get with the JPEG. Now again, if you properly expose the image, you wouldn't have this problem. But if you need to fix something, then you're gonna have a better chance of fixing it in RAW than you would with JPEG. If you're a perfect photographer and you always get it right, JPEG's for you, or RAW, JPEG or RAW. If you're the kind of person that sometimes needs to adjust things that didn't quite work out in camera, you might want to do more RAW images as opposed to JPEGs. Now let me show you another difference between the two. If I go to the RAW shot and I want to fix the white balance, then when I go to white balance, I've got all the choices because they weren't locked in with, hi, just started using RAW. This is right on time. Cool, Felix. If I go to the white balance pop-up, I've got all of these choices. I've got daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, flash, and custom. These might sound familiar because they were the same exact settings you had on your camera. You could choose from right on your camera. You could go dial in these exact same ones. So if I choose cloudy, it's going to make it look like that. Not that big of a difference. If I choose daylight, again, not that big of a difference. If I go to auto, it looks flatter. If I go to tungsten, it's probably going to make it look bluer. Yep, but it's screwing up the other things that shouldn't be blue. If I go to fluorescent, again, it's screwing up the things that shouldn't be blue because these are not the right ones. If I go to flash, and that one's okay, but it should probably be either on daylight or cloudy. And since we see clouds, we're going to stick with cloudy. All right, so I go to cloudy, and now the building looks the way it's supposed to look, and the clouds look the way they're supposed to look. Now, if I go to the JPEG, let's go back to the JPEG with all that clipping, and I say, okay, well, I pull the clipping back as far as I could with the whites, and now I want to adjust the white balance. I don't have those choices. This is all I get because the white balance has been baked into the shot based on whatever the camera was set on. So you don't get to change it. You can go change it, with a custom. You can go drag the slider all day long and make it more blue or more warm, more cold or more warm. But you don't get a preset for it because that's the nature of JPEGs. It was baked in, so you don't get a choice. Now, the next thing is, what if I want to use a profile? So again, we go back to the RAW, and we go back to the profiles. Notice I've got what Adobe gives you in Lightroom and Photoshop and Camera Raw and all this. We have Camera Raw profiles. So we have landscape, portrait, standard, and vivid. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have other profiles. We call them creative profiles like monochrome, and here we go to some of the creative ones. Those are the raw ones. We've got artistic, and we've got black and white profiles, and we've got vintage profiles. We've got all these different profiles to choose from. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just this first grouping, which are the raw profiles. So landscape, Adobe Color, Landscape, Portrait, Standard, and Vivid are for raw images. If I go to the JPEG, and I go to the, here, let's go to the JPEG, and let's go to that same profile. I don't even have the pop-up. Well, I do have the pop-up, but I don't have those same choices. All I have is color or monochrome, meaning black and white or color. I don't have landscape, vivid, portrait, so forth and so on, because those are raw profiles. Now, what are raw profiles for? Like, why do you even need these? Why do you care? Because they're designed to give you a starting point on a raw image. If you have a JPEG, you've already got a starting point. It was picked by your camera, so you don't have a choice. So, for example, if I were to choose Adobe Landscape, that gives me that. If I were to choose Adobe Vivid, it gives me that, and I kind of like Landscape better as my starting point. Now, it still doesn't mean I can't do all the other things, but here's the biggest difference between a profile or a preset or just using the sliders. Profiles give you that starting point without affecting the sliders. It didn't affect my whites. It didn't affect any other slider. It gave me exactly what it gave me without changing the white balance or changing anything else I did. So that's why we like profiles, is because they don't fix anything else. Or they don't change anything else. I shouldn't say fix. They don't change anything else. So that's another reason for profiles. So you still have artistic profiles to choose from in either case, but if you want that starting point on a raw file, you've got the starting point of the raw profiles. Next up, sharpening. If we go to the JPEG and we go to sharpening under detail, you'll notice that the slider is at 0, which all the sliders should be at 0, right? They should start at 0 because it hasn't done anything yet. There's only one slider in Lightroom or Camera Raw when you bring in an image that changes, and that's sharpening. If you bring in a JPEG, it doesn't change. But if I go look at my raw file, it has sharpening applied to it already. Why is that? Why does JPEG not apply any sharpening when you bring it in and raw files do? Because, once again, your JPEG was already sharpened in the camera. So there was already sharpening applied to it, and I'm going to turn off this. Maybe I shouldn't, just to keep showing you the difference. But there's no additional sharpening applied to it in Lightroom because it already got sharpened in the camera. Now, whether it sharpened it enough, you can always apply more. If it over sharpened it, there's not a whole lot you can do to it because your camera made that decision. And usually it's just going to make a good decision, but it made it for you. The reason we sharpen raw files when we come in, and this is the only slider, the only thing that gets applied to your raw file automatically, is because the camera didn't sharpen it. And if we didn't sharpen it for you, you'd probably never shoot raw again because all your images will look soft. So there you go. I prefer to slide my own sliders, and you can for everything else. And you can slide your own for this one too. You can go back to 0 if you want. But this one says, I'm going to give you a head start. I'm going to put you on some sharpening because it's a raw image, and it needs it. Just the raw process alone makes your image not as sharp as it would be from the camera sensor, because it's just the translation from the sensor to raw. It's not going to be quite as sharp. So it's not a night and day amount of sharpening. It's just it applies some right off the bat. All right, next up. Now I've been doing all of this in Lightroom Classic and working with that histogram. But if I head over to Lightroom and I go start working on an image, we can go work on those same images. By default, that histogram is not there. And for a long time, people might think, oh, this version of Lightroom doesn't have a histogram. It's there, but you have to turn it on. So if I go to if I'm in editing and I go to the little 3-dot menu here, right here, and then I click, I can show histogram. And now I've got the same histogram, but I don't get the same ability. I can turn on my highlight warning, but I can't drag in the histogram. I would have to go down to light, and I would have to go down to highlights and fix it there, or not highlights, whites. There we go. That one's already been adjusted, so I'd have to go to whites and adjust it there. So if we go, so these were already adjusted because it got synced over from Classic. But anyway, that's how you bring up the histogram to at least turn the warning on or off by clicking that little highlight triangle. And if there was a shadow clipping, you could turn that warning on or off as well. So Lightroom does have a histogram, but you don't get the sliders in it to drag based on where you point in the histogram like you do in Classic. So in Classic, we've got blacks, shadows, exposure, highlights, and whites all in the histogram. So if I just want to bring the exposure down, I can bring the exposure down just like that, right in the histogram. So it's a nice, fun way to edit without having to know what slider to go affect or to do multiple things at the same time, just based on bringing that down. All right, don't shoot, you see the whites. All right, so next up, we showed the histogram, talked about the sharpening. Next up, we're going to talk about the camera raw, or I shouldn't say that, the manufacturer's raw format versus digital negative. Okay, so you notice my file extension for this file is .nef file, and that's synonymous with Nikon. Nikon always names the raw file .nef. Canon names their CR2, I think, last time I checked. Sony, I believe, names theirs ARW, if I'm not mistaken. So every camera manufacturer has their own file extension. It doesn't really matter as long as the software supports that particular camera's raw files. There is no concern with that when it's a JPEG. When it's a JPEG, you don't ever think, hey, I got a brand new camera that just came out yesterday. I got it, and I'm going to start shooting in JPEG. I wonder if my software will support the JPEG. You never think about that. Now, you may wonder if it supports the lens profile, but you never worry if it supports JPEG because JPEG is a universal standard. So, okay, CR3s, got it. Thanks, I'm updated now. So Canon shoots CR3s. Anyway, so you never worry about it because JPEG is a universal standard. You never worry, is JPEG going to go out of business? Because there's no such thing. There's no such company called JPEG. It's a file format, and everybody supports it. Everybody supports JPEG if they support pictures. So you're always safe to shoot or work with JPEG files because every software application on the planet and every social media platform on the planet supports JPEGs. However, when I got my Nikon Z6 II, just came out not long ago, like within the last month or so, at that time, Camera Raw, Lightroom, and Lightroom Classic didn't support that file format just yet. Now you would think, well, was there really that much difference between the Z6 and the Z6 II? No. But every camera has a different RAW profile and different EXIF data, even if the cameras are like just a modest update between each other. So this latest update to Lightroom and Camera Raw, which came out, I don't know, last week or so ago, supports, I think it was last week, yeah, supports the Z6 II. So with that said, that's how I was able to bring these images in to Lightroom in the first place. If they weren't compatible, I wouldn't have even been able to display them right now. One way around that is DNG. Now, DNG is Adobe's proposed standard for RAW files. It's not, in other words, if Adobe went out of business tomorrow, DNG would still exist because it's proposed and given out as an open standard. But that doesn't mean that everybody supports it, meaning writing those files. So camera manufacturers like Canon and Nikon, Sony, they still write their own proprietary formats. And that's, they do whatever they do because they're their own companies. They can do whatever they want to do. It's a free world. But with that said, if they did work with DNGs, we would never have to worry about the software being updated to support their new cameras, because DNGs already are supported all the way back to Photoshop 7. Yes, before CS, before CS6, CS1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, there was Photoshop 7. So Photoshop 7, way back in the 90s, whenever that version came out, got support for DNG, and we've had support for DNG all the way up to now. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about the iPhone, because Apple's ProRAW format works in DNG. So we did update to support the lenses and all that and the camera profiles, but even if we hadn't done that, you would still have been able to open up those DNGs inside of Lightroom and they would work. Now, should I worry about that now that my software works? Worry would be a strong word. You probably don't need to worry about it, but there are some advantages to working in DNG even if your camera is supported. So let me show you the difference. Now I've made an adjustment to this photo, right? I adjusted well, it got an adjustment with the camera, with the sharpening, and it got an adjustment with the white slider, right? So adjustments have been made. If I were to go look at this image out in the operating system, let's go look at it in the folder, Show in Finder. Then what I'm going to have, I can view these by name. What I'm typically going to have, one more step, hang on, let me save it. There we go. There we go, that's what I was looking for. What I'm typically going to have is I'm going to have the NEF file, and I hit save, so it created the XMP metadata file to go with it. If I didn't do that save, if I didn't create this extra file, if I were to just copy that NEF and give it to you, you'd be able to open it, but you wouldn't have my white slider done to it. And if you didn't open it up in an Adobe app, you wouldn't have the sharpening applied to it. It would basically be just out of the camera. The XMP or metadata is all the adjustments. So this little 26 megabyte, these files have gotten big. This little 9K file, I was going to say these files have gotten big. This little 9K file is really all the edits you do. So if I go back and adjust anything else, here, let's zoom out. And I go back and I adjust, here, let's go in, we gave it cloudy, we gave it landscape. If I were to bring the exposure down a bit, because again, it was a little overexposed. If I were to add a little dehaze to it, there we go, really start to bring that out. Again, all of those changes I'm making are non-destructive, meaning they aren't ever changing the actual NEF file. But if I were to hit Command S, which is save the metadata out to the file, and I can never figure out where that is in the actual menu. It's under, should be under here. There we go. Save metadata to file, Command S, just like we save in Control S, just like we save in any other application. What that's telling it to do is write that metadata out to the operating system. So that way, if you took both of these files together and gave it to somebody and they opened it up, it would have all your changes that you've done to it. You throw away that XMP file and the changes go with it. Now, you've never had to worry about this in the past because all your changes are stored in your Lightroom catalog. So that's why I didn't create that file by automatically in the operating system, because it doesn't have to. All your changes are stored in the catalog, and as long as this image is in your catalog, it will reflect whatever changes you've made. But if you wanted to take it somewhere or give it to someone with those changes made to it, then you would need that XMP to go with it if you wanted them to have your changes, or your adjustments, I should say. All right, so NEF files don't store the actual changes in them, but DNGs and JPEGs do. So if I were to now convert this file into a DNG, so I select it, go to my library menu, come down to convert photo to DNG, and I'll accept the defaults. Basically, convert it with a DNG file extension, give it a medium-sized preview, embed the fast load data, and don't embed the original file. Delete the original after a successful conversion. Click OK. In a few seconds, that is now a DNG instead of an NEF file. So it converted that DNG file, and if I don't know if it did it automatically, but if I go look at that DNG file now, yep, it did do it automatically. There's no XMP file because it just rolled it in to the DNG. So it just said, oh, you don't need this XMP anymore because you're working with a DNG, and therefore the DNG actually has all those edits inside of it. It doesn't need to be a separate file. Now, also remember it was 26 megabytes. Now it's only 23 megabytes. So it made it a little smaller. So those are the main two reasons I convert to DNGs, is because if you're shooting thousands of files a year and you're saving an average of 3 or 4 or 5 megabytes per file, it saves disk space. And you can make the argument disk space is cheap, but why use up more of it if you don't have to? So now, is there a downside to converting to DNG? I've been converting to DNG since 2007, which is when I really started shooting seriously. So how many years ago was that? 13 years ago? And I've never once regretted converting to a DNG. The only time I would even say that DNG could be a disadvantage is if you're not using, or I shouldn't say not, if you're using the camera manufacturer's raw conversion software. So if you're using software by Canon, or you're using software by Nikon, or if you're using software by Sony, they sometimes put special things in their raw file that only their software sees. And therefore, if you converted it to a DNG, it wouldn't be there anymore. That data wouldn't be there. So if you're not using the camera manufacturer's conversion software, then there's no reason that I can think of not to convert to DNG, other than it takes an extra step. Yeah. So don't live in regrets. And no XMP sounds wonderful. Yeah, I've been living the no XMP life for years. Now, unfortunately, sadly, if you're working in Lightroom, not Lightroom Classic, so if you're working in this, oh, the file's gone. If you're working in this version of Lightroom, there is no conversion to DNG. It brings it in whatever you shot. So it will work with DNGs, don't get me wrong, but it won't convert them. So it sees that I converted this to a DNG and it brought it in, and it'll work with it all day long, but I have no way to convert this to a DNG inside of the other Lightroom. That is, that's a feature that has not made its way over to this version yet. But in Lightroom Classic, you can convert them upon import. So if you put in your memory card and you go to the import dialog box, one of the check boxes on the right-hand side is convert to DNG. So I usually do it then. That way, the metadata being written into the reason I didn't like DNG. Okay, Oliver, and that's certainly your choice. Yeah, you can convert to DNG upon import. So therefore, you don't have to think about it after the fact. Now, in this case, I did not do that conversion, so I wanted to show you the NEFs. So I'm going to select all, and I'm just going to, even though some JPEGs are in there too that are being selected, and I'm just going to go to Library, Convert Photos to DNG, and convert, because it will only convert raw files. So therefore, it will just ignore the JPEGs because they're JPEGs. So only convert raw files to DNGs and be done with it. So it will, and that's a background process. So I don't have to wait for it. I can keep working and keep showing you stuff while that happens in the background, while it converts these files. And you can start to see them change right at the top here. That one's done. Let's see how far it's made it. Those are all done. It's pretty quick. All right, so that one just got done. And so we're down here now. We're still waiting. Oh, these are JPEGs. That's a DNG. So yeah, it should be almost done, if not done. Okay, so that's how you convert after the fact. You can convert upon import. The only time you can't convert upon import is if you're shooting tethered. Tethered doesn't take the time to convert to a DNG because you're usually shooting tethered because you want to see the photos instantly. So when I shoot tethered, I have to do this step after the fact. And I usually do it after I've removed all the rejects, because no sense converting rejects. I'm just going to throw them away anyway. So I go through, I cull down to only the shots I'm going to keep, and then do the conversion, because those are the shots I'm going to keep, and I get rid of the rejects before I do the conversion. All right, now next up, let's talk about, because we don't want to run out of time, let's talk about mobile. So I've got, oh, and I didn't connect this yet. Hang on. Let me bring up my cable so you guys will be able to see this. And I'm going to plug in my iPhone 12 Pro Max. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that everything's good to go. All right, and now let me show it to you guys so I can walk. Oh, hang on, let me go ahead and turn this off. Turn on my do not disturb and turn off the settings so you can see me turn it on in the first place. And there we go. Okay. All right, so let me bring up my camera so you got, or my phone so you guys can see it. I usually think to do this ahead of time. This time I forgot that I was going to use my phone. So give me a second to bring this up into the stream. And let's go ahead and switch to the phone. There's the phone. Cancel. Hang on one more time. I missed it. There it is. All right, all right. Okay, so let's bring the phone over here so you guys can see it. All right, so there's my iPhone. I'm holding it in my hand right now, so you can see me swiping left or right. It's actual live. And I'm going to go into my settings, and I'm going to, in your settings, you're going to scroll all the way down. And again, this only works on the 12 Pro models at this time. I'm going to scroll all the way down to camera. So camera's kind of like in the middle of the screen right there. So when I go to camera, this is where you tell your iPhone what settings to use when you shoot photos or videos. Now, why is this a big deal, what I'm about to show you? With the 12 Pro and 12 Pro Max, Apple started making their own RAW, so an Apple Pro RAW. And the reason that this is a big deal is because we've been shooting RAW on an iPhone for years, basically since the iPhone 7 Plus, I think, was the first one that we could shoot RAW in, if you used the Lightroom camera. So you'd have to put Lightroom on your phone, you'd have to purposely go to the Lightroom camera, switch it to RAW, and then you could shoot RAW on an iPhone 7 Plus on up. But if you needed to capture something right on the spot and you didn't have time to do all that, then chances are you're going to either be capturing a JPEG or their high efficiency, which is a HEIF file. So most compatible means JPEG. High efficiency is theoretically a smaller file. And now, for the first time, in the built-in camera, I can turn on the ability to use ProRAW. Now, that's a big deal because it also kind of bakes in some of the Apple magic that they put into their camera processing, even though it's a RAW file. So you still get the ability to, all the advantages of RAW, but you also get some of that Apple goodness, I'll call it, some of that Apple magic in the camera shot as well. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. Not stuff that's baked in, but some of the stuff, especially in shooting in low light, shooting in different lighting situations that Apple does to process the images, you get a better image coming from the camera sensor with all these same advantages. All right, so now that I've basically turned it on in the settings, then I can swipe out of my settings and I can actually go into my camera. Once I go into the camera, now you'll see at the very top of the screen, there's a button that says RAW that's got a line through it, which means right now, if I shoot this image, it will shoot it in the high efficiency format. And they default to this because most people, especially, they turn it off by default on purpose because most people don't need to shoot in RAW. They don't know what they're doing. 2, even though it's turned on in the settings, they still turn it off by default when you bring up the camera because the images are so much larger. So therefore, people can you please let us know when Lightroom will be updated to take more advantage of Apple's ProRAW? As I've said, Dan, many times on these streams before, I cannot tell you about things that we have not announced yet. So I can just say things are in the works. I can't give you any kind of timelines. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and tap to take this shot here. So that's the high efficiency file. And now I'm going to go in and tap to shoot the actual RAW file. All right, so we'll do another high efficiency just so we can have the differences. We'll zoom in a little closer, and then we'll also shoot the RAW. All right, so now you see it says raw in the upper left-hand corner. You see it doesn't say raw in the upper left-hand corner, which means it's the high efficiency. That one says raw. This one does not say raw. Now, you could go and do all the editing that you would normally do in the iPhone app because they've updated it to work with RAW files. So if you like editing your images there, you're good to go. But if you go to Lightroom and you've got auto import turned on, which I do, and in a few seconds, it'll start bringing those in. It brought those 4 images in at the very top there. We already take advantage of ProRAW. The latest update that supported my Nikon Z6 II also supports the ProRAW format as best we can. Now keep in mind, it was DNG, so we already supported the file format anyway, but we did update Lightroom and Camera Raw to work specifically with that Apple magic I was talking about. So Dan, if you're thinking we didn't do anything, we did. This latest update actually was for this new RAW format. But you said more, so I think you meant more in that case. All right. I don't know what I beat you on, Oliver, but okay. Compression algorithm. Efficient. Okay, gotcha. All right, so now, so that's happened, and it's syncing now. So at the very top there, it's uploading the last shot. And if I were to now take these 4 shots, let's select them. I'm going to move them to the same album that we're looking at on screen over there. So let's add 2, and let's put them in Demo, Photography Masterclass, RAW versus JPEG. Let's put them in that same album, same collection, so that way when it does sync them, they will also appear in the right place. Okay. Where's my mouse? Hello, mousey. Oh, wrong mouse. Hang on. There we go. And so now if I scroll down to the bottom of this collection, yep, there they are. Okay. So I didn't have to do anything extra. All I had to do was shoot in RAW, add them to Lightroom, and put them in the same album and or collection I was looking at, and they get synced. So they got synced up to the cloud. They're backed up now, and they're full resolution, and they're also got synced down to both my versions of Lightroom. So if I go to Lightroom, there they are at the very bottom there. If I go to Lightroom Classic, because this particular collection is synced to the cloud that I added them to, over here on the left-hand side, there's the sync symbol. They automatically got synced to that collection as well. And of course, they're in my all photos area as well. So now let's look at some of those differences. Here's the high efficiency file. And I notice that the white balance is off. If I go to edit that white balance, guess what? I have to do it manually because the high efficiency is just like a JPEG in that respect, is that it doesn't give me any choices to do anything. But if I go look at the raw file, I've got, and that's the Pro Raw file, which looks a little darker, unprocessed. I've got the ability to not only fix the white balance, so I can use daylight, which is not right. I could use cloudy, I could use shade, I could use flash, I could use any one of these, or I could just simply say auto, or most importantly, I could just go ahead and use the white balance eyedropper and pick the white balance that I want that matches what I want best. So there we go. So now I got the white balance fixed. I can also do a Apple or Adobe Vivid, and I can also do an auto tone to kind of brighten that whole scene up and make any adjustments I want. So I can add a little bit more texture to it. I can add a little bit more clarity to it, and I could I would crop it as well, but you get the idea. So I'm able to work with my full spectrum of editing tools without any downsides, because I'm now shooting raw on my iPhone. And to have a raw capable phone in your pocket that you can always shoot the best possible quality image is freaking amazing. And again, it does, we were able to do this before for years with the Lightroom camera, but now I don't have to even think about bringing up the Lightroom camera, and I still get all the same benefits. When I do import these shots to Lightroom, they're there to edit on my iPad, my phone, or my desktop. They're synced, they're backed up, And I get all the same benefits and settings as well. Speaking of settings, if I go to lens corrections and I enable lens profile corrections, you can see it made that change as well. It's making a slight change to the bowing of the image because in that Lightroom update, we also added the support for those models. So for the 12 Pro Max, which is what I use, the back camera, and it's using that lens profile to fix any distortion. So I get that as well as all the other benefits plus, and if I go to detail, like I said, it's already sharpened the image as well. So it's done all of those things because I shot in RAW. Now, what about size? Let's go back to the to one of the HEIC files. And if I go to basic and I look at, or I'm sorry, go to library and I look at the size. If we scroll down a bit and I go look at the size of this file. There we go. 1.55 megabytes for the HEIC, high efficiency. If I go look at the RAW, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to click the, go back, there we go. Didn't mean to click the map. I clicked the map icon. But if I go look at the RAW file, one of these is the RAW. There we go. 24.65 megabytes. Big difference. 20-something megabytes bigger for the RAW file. So this is why it turns off RAW by default. This is why you have to purposely go turn it on and shoot with it, because they don't want to screw up all your space or take up all your space for people that are just randomly taking photos and they didn't even know that that they could shoot in RAW, and they don't even know what RAW is. They don't know the benefits. They don't care. So HEIC by default, you can switch it to more efficient, which is JPEG. You can shoot in RAW if you want, and you notice that that RAW file is in fact a DNG. So it's not Apple's RAW format extension, it's DNG, so it's compatible, therefore, right off the bat with all DNG conversions, all DNG converters, things that work with DNG. Yeah, video is HEIC, or no, video is HEVC, and images are HEIC, or both are HE, got it. So I was mistaken on the acronyms. So the high efficiency format, I will refer to it from now on, is, again, they're better than a JPEG, but still smaller, way smaller than a RAW file. All right, so now, if I were to keep working on this image for the last 2 minutes here that I have, I would probably go in and just do a little cropping there. There we go. And I would probably unlock it and just get like something like that. And all right, so now we've got that done to it. And I did it to both of them, which is fine, but let's go back out. Let's make it to this one. I would still bring up my exposure just a bit more on that shot. Now, if I wanted to edit this is another big one. If I wanted to do more editing inside of Photoshop, maybe I want to get rid of this kind of backdrop thing here. Then notice I'm in my collection, RAW versus JPEG, and now if I were to right click on this and say edit in Photoshop, or Command E, Control E, because that is a DNG file, it will already automatically make a copy. So I don't have to worry about duplicating the layer or doing anything first. It will automatically make a copy of that file so that I don't have to do anything else. So now, for example, if I were to just select that area that I don't want, and I were to simply hit delete and use content aware fill and just fill that area in, get that nice and filled in that way. Same thing over here. And delete and content aware fill. Fill that in. And maybe I want to use my healing brush, and we'll heal that little line there out of the shot. There we go, kind of just touching up the background a little bit. All right, so now that I've done those things, if I were done, I'd hit save. Working again with the full resolution, close it, head back to Lightroom or Lightroom Classic, and it will put that PSD that it just made with the background fixed, it will group it with the original DNG file. So I still have my original. I now have my newly edited file to work with. So that's how to work back and forth between your DNGs or high efficiency files in Photoshop, because Photoshop's, if it's a raw file, it's already going to make a copy anyway. All right, so with that said, I hope you got something out of today's masterclass. What are the disadvantages with DNG? Kurt, I told you the only thing is if you're working with the camera manufacturer's software and they add things to their raw files that DNG doesn't support. That's about the only advantage I can think of. All right, so with that said, cheers everybody. Happy holidays. Thanks for watching. Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year. I'll be back after the first of the year with my new masterclass, I think on January 8th. Cheers everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye everybody.